foreign policy of the Ford administration, and it struck me that, you know, we had a debate in the Republican Party between loyalists of Ford and loyalists of Reagan that went down to the floor of the convention. Some of you remember what I know only from history books, but that tension between the good government, Midwestern, Northeast, moderate Republican establishment and the more activist Republican movement that Ronald Reagan brought to the fore still exists in the party. I mean, you've got, you know, if you mention Tea Party in the company of Senator Lugar, I don't think that you're going to improve his mood. You know, and so I think, but the thing is, you know, the process that part of what we hope to accomplish here, working with our partners at Goldwater and with other policy institutes, was to make a demonstration of what you could achieve through consensus. Because some of these debates, we've had them already. I mean, some of us have our doubts about the repeal amendment. For example, would the repeal amendment result in congressional initiatives having to bring in a blocking third of state legislatures into the legislative process to make sure that states aren't going to repeal it once it passes? I mean, but the most important thing about this is to start a national dialogue aimed at building consensus, aimed at unifying the different tendencies in the party behind proposals. We're at the beginning now, and lots of people are coming with lots of different ideas. And Trent is entirely correct. A lot of these ideas have major problems. And we've got to listen to the people who point them out. But the main thing is that at the end of the day, we want to get a snowball rolling down the mountain that will clarify proposals that gain increasing support as time goes by and as the process gains adherence. And hopefully what we're doing here is just the first step towards building that consensus. And so I look forward to taking many objections from Trent England and satisfying them in one way or another here in the months ahead.
I'm Roman Buehler, president of the Madison Amendment Coalition, which is to give states the same power as Congress to propose an individual amendment to the Constitution. It's been endorsed by ALEC. But I think Randy is exactly right, and here's my question. This is the time for an Article 5 convention on something that state legislators can agree on. We have a 50-year high in state legislative support around the country. And you correctly point out that people are afraid of an Article 5 convention, but correctly point out that we can control an Article 5 convention if we do it properly. And I'd be interested in the reaction of people on the panel to the idea that if there really is a lot of fear out there about a convention running away, could we get rid of that fear by doing two things? One, by passing in states that call for the convention a no runaway convention law that would limit the authority of delegates to the convention and automatically replace any delegate who violated their state law. So a runaway convention would be chopped off before it even started. And second, to go to our friends in Congress who don't run a runaway convention and get at least 41 senators and 218 House members to sign a pledge that under no circumstances will they refer to the states for ratification any amendment outside of the scope of the convention that the states set. And with those two strategies, make it politically possible for all of you in your states to work on the amendment of your choice.
I think, unfortunately, we have to wrap up here in the next minute, so we might be able to fit in a quick question there. But I think what Professor Barnett said is the main point, that a successful push towards an Article 5 convention is much more likely to result in an amendment to the Constitution than in an Article 5 convention. I mean, by the time you get all your ducks lined up in a row for an Article 5 convention, you've already got 2/3 of Congress, and then Congress can just propose the amendment directly. So let's try to fit in one more question if we can.
Well, Professor Barnett, I've got a lot of admiration for you. You know, I've been your student, and I've worked with think tanks to help you get your stuff published, and I've certainly vampirized some of your arguments on the House floor. But I do want to ask you, I wonder if your approach isn't kind of uniquely vulnerable to some objection that other Amendment 5 type, other Article 5 type proposals aren't vulnerable to. I mean, if you look at the math, it looks like about 1/3 of the population could be in 2/3 of the states. And you know, they could use the repeal amendment basically to have a minority veto of federal legislation. This is a particular concern to me because, especially with respect to the federal government's authority to use the military, you know, use its war powers. Instead of a President-Congress cooperation, you have a President-Congress second-guessed by a bunch of state legislators combination. I wonder if that's a danger that you think.
It's whether you think it's a bug or a feature depends on how you feel about structural constraints. I mean, it's certainly true that you could assemble 2/3 of the states that would represent populations that are worth less than half, that are less than half of the general population. There's no doubt about that, and that will be one of the principal arguments used by the left. Again, and I'm not tarring you by that, but it is one of the principal arguments used by the left against this. All I want to say is that the whole purpose of having a constitution in the first place is to constrain majoritarian will. Now, that means to empower the majority to govern, but also to protect the minorities. And that's what Madison was all about. That's what checks and balances are all about. It's what the presidential veto is about. It's what having a Senate, which is not apportioned according to population, is about. You could assemble a majority of senators in the Senate, which represent less than half of the population too, which is why the left objects to the Senate. So the whole structural reason why we have a constitution is to put checks on where, what Madison said, where the power is, the greatest danger of abuse lies. And in a Republican form of government, the greatest power lies in the majority of the people. That's Madison's words, not mine. And so we are trying to get, a majority of the people are very unhappy with what's happening in Congress. But all we're doing here is we're not saying a minority can legislate. We're saying a minority, possibly, or a majority, can block the legislations of others. And who are those others? A bare majority of 535 individual people who sit up on the Hill inside the Beltway. So this is a myth to say it's a majority of the country that is passing, for example, Obamacare. The majority of the country was never asked. 535 members were able to do that. And so you have thousands of state legislators who are also democratically elected being able to check the will of 535 here inside the Beltway. You have to ask yourself, would that be an improvement to the structure of the Constitution or not? That's the prudential question you need to ask yourself.
Thank you. Thank you all for coming. It's been a great series of panels.